Think we're about live. We're probably live on social. So if you're on social, welcome. We'll let all of the registrants in now. Go ahead and start. Okay, that's good. Welcome everybody to today's webinar. If you can hear and see me, go ahead and put yes in the chat. That's the first thing we want to see. Excellent. That's great. Well, welcome everyone. Happy Friday. It's probably Friday for most of us. It might be Saturday for a couple of us. So wherever you are, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And thank you for returning for yet another Leader Factor webinar. We were talking this morning, and this is the 1 year mark that we have been running regular webinars, which is pretty amazing, isn't it, Tim?
Yeah, it really is. It's amazing. It's gone by pretty fast. We've had a lot of fun.
It's gone by way fast.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and get some locations in the chat. Let's see where everybody's from today. We got Barcelona, Spain. Jenna, nice to have you. Durango, Colorado, Milwaukee, Portland, Oregon, Idaho, Knoxville, London, Scotland,
Brazil.
London,
India.
We got a lot. We got a few Indias. Toronto, Canada. Kate, welcome. Olga, welcome. We've got Helsinki, Finland. George from Athens. Thais from Sao Paulo. Cindy from Solana Beach. Yeah, Lynn's from the Philippines. Lima, Peru. Once again, everyone, we've got a global audience today. It's so fun. I love seeing where everyone's from every month. Wichita, Kansas, Germany. We're from all over the place. That's great. Is anyone here for their second or third or fourth or
South
15th
Korea
Leader Factor webinar? You got Korea?
Yeah. 안녕하세요, 여러분.
That's awesome. Maybe we should do the entire webinar in Korean.
I could get part way through, but not the whole way through.
I would get none of the way through.
I'm a little rusty.
You'd be left to yourself.
Yeah.
Thanks everybody that's attending for their second or fifth or seventh time. It's fantastic to have you back, and we're grateful that you continue to come back, and we're working very hard to continue to put good content out there so that you can keep coming back every month and take away something valuable, take away a valuable nugget. Today's webinar is very interesting. We're excited about this one. We've been working very hard on it. The title is How to Create a Deeply Inclusive Culture, Removing Junk Theories of Superiority at Work. So if you're here to learn about inclusion, you are in the right place. Okay, we've got just a couple housekeeping items. We're going on, I think, 4 or 5 different platforms. And so wherever you are, welcome. Just know we have moderators on each of those platforms, so they will be there to answer questions. This will be recorded, just so you know, and it will be made available to all of the registrants after the fact. So don't worry if you need to step out for a few minutes, or if you want to come back and double click on something later, you'll have an opportunity to do that. Please do not post anything that's distracting or self-serving in the chat. We want to keep everything super clean to make sure that we have a valuable experience for everyone. And those moderators are going to be keeping track of the chat and making sure that we follow those rules today. Okay, so I've got a question that I want to start out with. We often start out with a question like this. What is something enjoyable that you experience every day that you've come to take for granted? Go ahead and put your answers in the chat. I'm interested to see what you have to say.
Great question.
What's something enjoyable you get to experience every day that you've come to take for granted? Tim, do you see any that you like?
Yeah, the sun.
The sun. Yeah, I agree.
It's showering.
Showering.
Hey, have you ever been in a place where you couldn't shower? Yes, that's actually a good one.
Birds chirping. Carissa, harvesting fruits from the garden. Azim, tea.
Fantastic.
Jessica Wilden, first sip of coffee. Picking up my kids at school. Pablo, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Denise, the beauty of my backyard.
Windows.
Windows. Wow. No kidding.
That is great.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wi-Fi.
Going outside.
Going outside. That one hits home to me. The Wi-Fi one. I've got a transformer near my house, and it went out. So the electricity to our house went out a few days ago, and I remembered how nice it is to have electricity and Wi-Fi. My life stopped for a little while.
Junior, here's a good one. Hugging people and shaking hands.
No kidding. Haven't we
We've
missed
started,
that?
I don't know where you are in the world, but here we've started to do that again. We're allowed to do that again. And it is amazing.
Yeah, it
We've missed
truly
it.
is. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. We want to call that out because life is good. There are a lot of things that are unfortunate that happen in the world, and a lot of things that aren't great, but there are a lot of things that are, like windows and the sun. So we're grateful to be with you today to recognize some of those things and talk about inclusion. So if you haven't read it yet, please, The Four Stages of Psychological Safety. It is a must read. If you've read it, please go ahead and leave us a review on Amazon. If you haven't read it yet, please pick up a copy. We're going to be doing a giveaway at the end of this webinar for 8 free copies of the book, so stick around. We're also announcing the full version of the online course. So for those of you who have been waiting for that, that's a special announcement that we're excited to make at the end today. So the author of the book, Dr. Timothy Clark, is with us today as my co-host and the facilitator of today's webinar. He's the CEO of Leader Factor. He's an Oxford-trained social scientist. Many of you have come to know Tim over the last little while through these webinars and some of our client engagements. I know that many people that have gone through the certification come to these webinars. So if you've done the certification, welcome back. We're excited to have you. So Tim, we'll go ahead and just jump right into it and talk about inclusion.
We're going to jump right in and we're going to talk about inclusion. How do you create a deeply inclusive environment? Well, there's a process and there's an order of operations. In other words, the sequence matters. You can't do things in any old order that you want to. You really got to begin with first things first. And so step one is to focus on your values and your beliefs. If you don't focus on that, if you don't clarify your values and beliefs, what happens? If you just go headlong into this or you try to skip to behaviors and skills, how do you govern your behaviors and skills? How do you say what, how do you figure out what you stand for and what you don't? How do you figure out what's acceptable and what's not? How do you decide how you're going to be inclusive, how you're going to be able to create that? So we start with values and skills, step one, we go to behavior, or we start with values and beliefs rather, then we go to step two, which is behaviors and skills. Then step three is policies and procedures. And then finally, step four is structure, process, and systems. Now that's a lot. That's the whole roadmap. And we're not going to be able to tackle all of that today. We're going to focus on step one, values and beliefs. That's going to be our primary focus today, right, Junior?
That's right.
So let's jump in and we're going to invoke the incredible work of the great African-American reformer, Frederick Douglass. He made a statement. He gave a speech in 1869 called the Composite Society speech in Boston, 1869. And in that speech, he made a very important statement. He said, "I know of no rights of race superior to the rights of humanity." Now, what does that mean? And why is that important? Well, what he was advocating for in the speech was that Chinese immigrants be granted citizenship in the United States. And so he's giving us a logic for what we call our hierarchy of loyalties. So we have different things to be loyal to as human beings. Well, what's at the top? What comes first? And then what comes after that? That's the question that he answered in his statement. He gave us a hierarchy of loyalties. And he said humanity first, and then other human characteristics come second. So you could do it that way. Or you could say certain human characteristics first, and then humanity second. So humanity is subordinated to human characteristics. Well, you've got to take a point of view. You've got to take a position. You've got to take a stand. What is going to be your hierarchy of loyalties? What's going to come first? And what's going to come second? Is humanity going to come first? Or are human characteristics going to come first. So Junior, maybe talk a little bit about this slide and how it represents and what it represents.
I want to take a second and just acknowledge the profundity of that quote. We go pretty quickly through this piece of the webinar, but that could deserve an entire hour just talking about that quote. If you think about the context in which he was speaking, it is truly an amazing quote. So
let me say it again. Yeah, let me say it again, Junior. He said, "I know of no rights of race. Race is a human characteristic that are superior to the rights of humanity."
Yeah, I love that. So here you've got some of the human characteristics that we talk about, okay, that he may have been referring to. And we've tried to spell these out a little bit. We've got age, ancestry, association, generation, living status, physical appearance, religious affiliation, social status, wealth is very, very, very interesting. And the tendency of many of us is to go right to these, right? That's the first thing we think about instead of looking right at the person and acknowledging our common humanity. So do you see these? Are we crazy, or do we see these types of human characteristics being used for prejudgment all the time? Go ahead and put it in the chat if you see these. Wow, this brings it home. Liza, yes, absolutely. All the time. Carol, yes, absolutely. All of them. Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting. This happens all the time. So this, to me, as we were preparing for the webinar, was really this interesting fork in the road. And it's really the highest piece of upstream logic that I could imagine is this first fork in the road. It's the very first thing that we're met with when we meet another person, when we're interacting with another person, is which road do we go down? Is it humanity or is it human characteristics? And which comes first?
Which comes first? You've got to have a premise. Now let's turn that around, right, Junior?
Yep.
Okay, so here we go.
Here's the next one, okay? This is flipped, where we're going human characteristics first, humanity second. Okay. And that's the opportunity. Think of the last 5 times you interacted with someone. Okay. That was probably within the last 24 hours. And how did you look at that person? Did you look first at human characteristics and then decide how you were going to treat them? Or did you look first at the fact that they are human? And that's something that we all share. I know that we've been on both sides of this all of us forever. We've sometimes made the incorrect choice, I'm sure. And there are many times where we make the correct choice and it makes a massive difference. And you have to realize that the context of this piece of the discussion is inside the topic of how to create inclusion. And this is really the crux of the issue. How do you create inclusion? You first treat people as humans and not human characteristics. That is really the crux of the issue. And the gold nugget for today, it's the takeaway. If you take nothing else away from this webinar, take away that fact that you have an opportunity to go first to humanity or human characteristics when you're dealing with another person. Yep. And if you go to human characteristics off the bat, we've already lost. It's game over. We need to go to humanity to promote inclusion.
Yeah, we really do. So if you get it backwards, as you say, then you're on a slippery slope. Okay. So let's ask the question, though. What happens when you put humanity first and human characteristics second? What happens? Let's go to the chat, and we'd love to get some of your feedback on that. If you put humanity first and human characteristics second, what consequences do we see? What happens?
We connect, empathy,
common ground.
We smile more because we want to know the person. You can show up fully for each other. You act with more compassion. Everyone matters and feel they do. Lori, I really like that. Authenticity. We show up as equals. Mark, great point.
We listen.
We listen. We always find something in common and focus on that. Daniela, love that.
I love this. It mitigates bias. Now, let's talk about that for a minute. A bias is a preference. Some biases are good and positive. Some are negative and destructive. We all have bias. We're all dripping with bias as human beings. We all have both conscious and unconscious bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we put humanity first, I think, and there was, I can't remember who put the comment in the chat. It helps us to mitigate bias in ourselves and in others. So I think what's unconscious becomes conscious over time. Gradually, we become more familiar with the unconscious biases that we might have related to acquired socialization. And so it gets us on the road to understanding that and gaining a higher level of self-awareness, which is really good.
Well, there's a comment that I really like, Rahul Preet. I'm sorry if I'm getting your name wrong. We see past the human characteristics, or they seem small. I like the way that you phrased that. Those human characteristics seem small, or perhaps less important. They're not the big blinking neon sign that we first see.
Right. Right.
These are great comments, everyone. Thank you for participating.
Yeah, let's go to the second question here. What happens when you put human characteristics first and humanity second? What have you seen in your own experience? I'm not talking about theory. I'm talking about your own personal life experience. What have you seen?
We're getting a lot of judgments.
A lot of judgment, a lot of discrimination, racism, exclusion, stereotyping, division, microaggressions,
Clicks, closing the door to truly getting to know someone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nancy, reduction of worth.
Silence.
Silence.
Misunderstanding. Assumptions. Poor decision making. Silos. Oh, I love this one, Junior. Missed opportunities.
Oh, isn't that true?
Yeah, missed opportunities.
Isn't that true? I've felt that before, for sure.
It prevents us from achieving a deeper level of intimacy and connection with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Closed decision making. Thanks, Rocco.
Yeah.
Great, everyone. These are great.
Okay, so thank you for that feedback. As Junior said, as we've been analyzing inclusion and organizations around the world in their efforts to create deeply inclusive organizations, we had to try to find the premise. So where do we go wrong? And where do we struggle? And where do we get on the slippery slope? And it's really with this premise that we've identified your hierarchy of loyalties. What comes first? Is it humanity or human characteristics? So we label this. If you put human characteristics first, we call it a junk theory of superiority. Here's the definition. A junk theory of superiority is an attempt to justify loyalty to a human characteristic above that of the human family. So, to create a deeply inclusive culture, we must subordinate human characteristics to the importance of the human family. So the human family comes first, humanity comes first, and then the characteristics. But if we try to invoke some theory of superiority based on human characteristics, is that not a junk theory? Is that not illegitimate? So that's something that I think we need to ponder. I think we've all been a part of that. We've seen it. Perhaps we've done it ourselves, right? And we've seen the exclusion that can create in organizations. All right, now let's transition to the topic of psychological safety, which is related. Let's talk about how it is related. So what is psychological safety? There's exploding interest in psychological safety around the world. Well, what does this have to do with building a deeply inclusive culture? Well, a great deal, actually. So let's define this term that we call psychological safety. Psychological safety is an environment of rewarded vulnerability. Now, you've got to think about that for a minute. Your vulnerability will be rewarded, not punished. Your human characteristics, your demographics, and your psychographics will be rewarded, not punished. If they're punished, then of course we can't get to inclusion. So psychological safety is fundamental to creating an inclusive environment. Let me just walk through the way that psychological safety works, because it progresses through 4 stages. And for those of you who have not read the book, The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of how this works. So psychological safety is a function of respect, which you see on the vertical axis, and permission, which you see on the horizontal axis. The first stage of psychological safety, the foundation, is what we call inclusion safety. Inclusion safety means that you feel included, you feel accepted, and you have a sense of belonging. That's the foundation. If we don't put the foundation in place, we're never going to achieve a deeply inclusive culture, and we're not going to be able to sustain it. So we begin there. And the reason we begin there is because, based on our global survey research, 92% of human beings across the world, they have told us that they want to be included first. That's the first need that they want to satisfy. So they're concerned about having inclusion safety. Then we move to stage 2, which is learner safety, which means that you can learn without fear of being embarrassed or marginalized or belittled or harshly criticized. So you can learn in a safe environment. And then we go to stage 3, which is contributor safety. Contributor safety builds on learner safety and inclusion safety. So I'm going to take everything that I've learned, all my skills and knowledge and experience, and now I have the opportunity to contribute something meaningful. I have the opportunity to make a difference, to do my part. And that's what human beings want to do. They want to make a difference. They want to do their part. They want to contribute. That's stage 3. And then finally, we go to stage 4, challenger safety. Challenger safety means that you feel free to challenge the status quo. You feel safe to challenge the status quo without fear of retaliation or retribution. So what you'll notice is that as you're moving through the 4 stages of psychological safety, you're climbing a ladder of vulnerability. Your level of personal exposure and risk is getting higher as you go from stage to stage. So with that framework in mind, our focus today is the stage 1, inclusion safety. How do we create inclusion safety as the foundation and then sustain that type of working environment, that type of climate, that type of atmosphere in the organization? It's not easy, because inclusion, as you know, is delicate, it's perishable, it's not permanent. Okay. Junior, let's do a polling question. I want to go back and let's actually do the first polling question. Can we bring that down?
Let's bring it down.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've gone ahead and launched this. Question 1, is creating a deeply inclusive culture a major priority for your organization? Yes or no? If you see the poll, go ahead and respond to it on your screen. If you're joining us from another social platform, go ahead and put it in the chat. If you'd like, you don't have to. You're welcome to. If you're enjoying the webinar so far, go ahead and give a like to the stream if you're on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook. We really enjoy having you all together today. I'm going to leave this up for about 5 more seconds, and then we'll close it out. One of the great things about having webinars like this is we get some good data, don't we, Tim?
Yeah, we do.
We get a lot of responses. It's interesting for everyone to be able to see what everyone else thinks. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and I'm going to go ahead and share the results with you. So we have 74% yes, 26% no. That doesn't include all of the responses across all platforms, but we've got quite a few here. So that's interesting. What do you think about that, Tim? What do you make of that?
Well, it's 3 out of 4 that are pursuing it as a major priority.
Yeah,
that's an overwhelming number. 3 out of 4 organizations are pursuing it. So it is not just on the radar screen, it's a priority.
I think it's interesting to think about the potential results of asking this question a decade ago. Even 5 years ago or 2 years ago, I think that the ratio would have been a little bit different, don't you?
I do. And I think the pandemic has really accelerated and expedited this.
Yeah.
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 Let's go to the next polling question, Junior. Let's bring that one down.
Okay. So this one, of the following characteristics, which one do you think we as humans use the most to exclude? Age, gender, education, nationality, political affiliation, race or ethnicity, religion, and socioeconomic status. So again, we'll leave this one open probably for the next 15 seconds or so. Please respond so we can get as much data as possible, and then we will share the results with you. So go ahead and comment your selection if you're not inside Zoom.
Yeah, this
Again,
is fascinating.
It sure is. Age, gender, education, nationality, political affiliation, race and ethnicity, religion, socioeconomic status. So we have 8 options. And I think
now, by the way, let me
ahead.
just say this. Nicole was just pointing out that it does not include disability. That's very true. We cannot include every demographic or psychographic as response categories, and we apologize for that.
Yeah, this is not exhaustive by any means.
It's not exhaustive, and we can't do all of it. Yeah.
Brian, it doesn't include baldness. You're right.
That's very true. Thank you.
Tim, I put that one on there. Tim asked me to take it off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's go ahead and close this one out. And I will share the results with you. Okay, so you can see we have a clear winner, if you can use the word. Race and ethnicity had the most responses at 43%.
Yeah.
Second was socioeconomic status at 25%. So, of course, as we said, this is not an exhaustive list, but of the 8 that we gave, race and socioeconomic status accounted for 68% of responses.
Yeah.
The next one past that was age at 10%, gender at 10%, education, nationality at 3%, political affiliation at 4%. I would have thought that political affiliation would have been a little bit higher on the list.
Yeah.
Religion, 3%. So really, we have these 2 that are far and away past the others, race and socioeconomic status.
And by the way, these are the 8 top demographics that we measure in most studies. And so if we didn't include a demographic that's important to you, we apologize for that. These are just the top 8 that we normally measure in empirical research. So we thought we'd solicit your feedback on this. The distribution is quite interesting.
Jan says race because it's the easiest to see. And I think that some of you are commenting that about, my question about political affiliation. I think you're probably right on.
Yeah.
I think you're probably right. It's very easy. It's very immediate. It's very obvious.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Okay, let's go to the third polling question, Junior.
Okay.
And I think you'll find this interesting.
This one is, using a 10-point scale where 1 is low and 10 is high, what overall level of inclusion safety do you feel in your organization? And if you're on social and you're commenting, you can just comment how most people might feel, how you think most people feel, what level of inclusion, if you don't want to put your own. Okay, this distribution is pretty interesting. We'll leave this one open for a few more seconds.
Yeah. We'd love to hear from you on this. And by the way, your responses are anonymous. We're just aggregating the data. We're just putting it together. So we'd love to hear from you.
Okay, let's go ahead and end this one. So get your response in the next 2 seconds and poll and share results. Okay. 8 was the most with 18%.
Okay.
And so it looks like our distribution is centering around 6 and 7. 4% of you said one, 4% said two, 3% said, or 8% said three, and 11% said four.
Right.
So that bottom quartile is kind of interesting, Tim. That at
It is.
first glance, you may not think that it's that interesting, but that's quite a big percentage that's in the bottom, the first four responses.
Well, it is. And the fact that it's a wide distribution, it
Yeah.
just shows
Yeah.
us that we've got quite a bit of work to do, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, we really do. Okay. So coming back to stage one, which is the foundation for creating inclusion safety, that is. Here's the fuller definition of the stage. Inclusion safety satisfies the basic human need to be included, accepted, and belong. It means it's not expensive to be yourself. You're accepted for who you are, including your unique attributes and defining characteristics, right? We've been talking about that. So then, if we're trying to create an inclusive environment, an inclusive culture, how do we do that? What are the terms of engagement? Well, there's a social exchange that has to take place. It's actually pretty simple. The team grants you inclusion, whatever your social collective or social unit or organization, whatever it is, the team grants you inclusion in exchange for your human status and for you not presenting the team with a threat of harm. That's it. It's pretty simple. And so if we summarize stage one, inclusion safety, it's a human right. It's not something that you earn. It's something that you're owed. If you're human and harmless, then we're morally obligated to include you into our society. So including another human being should be an act of prejudgment based on that person's worth. So I don't need to think about it. It's a prejudice. It's prejudicial in a good way, right? So I'm prejudging. I already know what the answer is. So it's not an act of judgment based on my opinion of your worthiness, based on some human characteristics that I choose to apply to you in a worthiness test, right? So we're saying apply a worth test, not a worthiness test, to each other in order to create a deeply inclusive culture. So,
Tim,
yeah.
quick question from LinkedIn. What do you mean by expensive?
That's a good question. Expensive means socially, emotionally, psychologically, politically, maybe even economically expensive to be yourself. Now, we all have to judge that. It's a matter of judgment. It's the way that we feel. We're always doing threat detection when we're with other people to understand if we think we're in a safe or an unsafe place. If we perceive that it's expensive in one or a combination of those ways, and it is based on perception and judgment, then what do? We change our behavior. Mm-hmm. And chances are we will withdraw, retreat, recoil. That's normally what humans do, right?
Yep. There are a couple.
Yeah, go ahead.
There are a couple other questions in the chat about what we mean by harmless. So Tanya asks, if you're human and harmless, is this a loaded statement? If you look at it from a certain perspective, it absolutely is. Yeah. Every human has the potential to inflict harm, all of us, right? Yeah. And that harm could go into any of those categories of expense that Tim just mentioned, right? And so when we say harmless, we're trying to say that we don't have that we're not presenting people with harm. Do we have the capacity to do that? Yeah, we all do. But if we are human,
deliberately.
Yeah, we're not deliberately. If we're human and we're not presenting you with harm, then the moral obligation is to include.
Yeah. So the governing principle here is that worth precedes worthiness, and that we should apply a worth test to each other based on humanity, right? Going back to our hierarchy of loyalties. So the worth precedes worthiness. If we apply a worthiness test to each other on what basis, on what grounds are we doing it? And which of those human characteristics are we invoking to create our worthiness test? And how does it stand up? It's pretty hard, right? So worth preceding worthiness has to be the governing principle. Now let's talk a little bit about a case study. It's a little bit humorous, at least in terms of the language, but it's not really that humorous, I guess, in reality. So we worked with a very large multinational construction company. And the company developed this culture, a siloed culture. Well, it was actually stratified. So instead of these vertical silos, they had this stratification of managers, and they called, this is their terminology, it's not mine. They called the managers cell phones. And the production personnel, the men and women that actually did the production, they called them tool belts. Now they called each other, I don't know where the terms originated. I don't know for sure, but they would call each other that. So the tool belts would call the managers cell phones, and the cell phones would call the production people tool belts. Now, were those terms of endearment? Probably not, probably disparaging terms. But it was interesting that the stratification between those who were called cell phones and those who were called tool belts, it became pretty deep. It became a pretty deep division, and it became a cultural fault line. And they would avoid talking to each other, even though they needed to coordinate, and even though there were obviously reporting relationships and a division of labor and roles and responsibilities and all of those things associated with it. They're developed, I guess what I would call some acrimony and some animosity and even some hostility between these two groups in this stratification. So the cell phones ended up not liking the tool belts, and the tool belts ended up not liking the cell phones. Not uncommon, right? It's just another way to divide. It's another basis on which to create a division. So it happens a lot. But I thought this was an interesting example. Now let's think about this example in the context of our hierarchy of loyalties. So on what basis are they dividing? On what basis has this division grown up? What are we talking about here? Why are they doing this? Right? So these are human characteristics. Could be positional, could be occupational, could be the perception of socioeconomic status. And so this us versus them division emerged gradually, and then it kind of hardened and it became calcified, and it became a barrier to performance and a barrier to inclusion, right? So what we're saying is that if in the hierarchy of loyalties, if humanity comes to the top, if that's our premise, then what we're going to try to do is to create a culturally flat organization, regardless then of your position or your title or your authority or any other artifact that the organization may give you or that others may give you. That may still be there, but culturally, you're going to try to create a flat organization. Junior, any comments coming in? Or
yeah, there are quite a few that are really interesting. It looks like a lot of people have seen this type of terminology used for a very long time: suits versus hands, white and blue collar, white hats.
Sure.
So it's this us versus them mentality at its very core, and humans have done this for as long as humans have been around.
Right.
and inclusion suffers so fast. Another important point that's coming from the chat is language is important. These types of things matter. And so if you let these types of things creep into your language and creep into your organization, you'll pay for it over the long term in culture. And these are types of cultural artifacts that are difficult to pull back.
They
Once
are.
that type of language gets embedded into a culture, very, very difficult to turn the ship around.
Junior, it reminds me of the statement that words create worlds.
Sure
Right?
do.
And we have to be very careful about that. We really do. And sometimes those words become hurtful or exclusionary. And we need to try to understand and recognize that. And we need to change that if that's happening.
And we need to monitor our own language. That's something that we can all do because
Yeah,
sometimes
do.
we may unwittingly participate in some of this.
Yeah, it's really true. It's really true. So here's a tendency, right? Based on our discussion today, we have a tendency to govern ourselves based on junk theories of superiority. I'll bet every single one of us has done this. So we invoke superiority based on some human characteristics, and that creates division. We try to elevate ourselves and we try to subordinate others. Happens all the time. There's work to do. We can do better. And I would say that we all need to hold up a mirror, and hopefully it's a very clean mirror, and we need to ask ourselves how we can improve. And then we need to go to work and help our institutions. And we need to have a sensitivity about this, don't we? It really does help if your hierarchy of loyalties is clear. And if you're putting humanity first, and we go back to that statement by Frederick Douglass, because that really is the premise. If you're going first to human characteristics, it's going to be difficult, and we're going to create divisions, right? Okay, so with that, let me just go back to the inclusive culture roadmap. So what we've done today is to focus on step one, values and beliefs, and ask ourselves, so what's the starting point? What's the premise? What's the point of departure? How do we begin this journey? Values and culture, values and beliefs rather is a placeholder, but what do we put there? And what we're saying is, what we would suggest is that we put humanity there at the top of the hierarchy of loyalties. And if we do that, I think we have a chance to be very successful, and we have a chance to start removing a lot of the obstacles that are getting in the way, that are creating divisions right now. Now, as we close or this portion of the webinar, let's just move a little bit to step two, behaviors and skills. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time, but it's more of a parting thought, and that is, you have two levers at your disposal as you're interacting with others. You have your modeling behavior and your coaching behavior. And I'm not even suggesting that you need to be in a formal managerial role. You could be an independent contributor. You could be in a technical role. It doesn't matter. You're still modeling and you're still coaching. And so, as I like to say, when it comes to creating a culture of inclusion and a culture of high psychological safety, you're either leading the way or getting in the way. You can't be neutral. You can't be a neutral party, because you are modeling certain behavioral norms, which are a reflection of your values and beliefs. The only question is, which ones are they? And did you put humanity at the top of the hierarchy of loyalties, or did you put some other human characteristics at the top so that you could subordinate certain groups or certain characteristics? So hopefully that's helpful to you. You always have these two levers: your modeling behavior, and then the way that you coach and interact with others. Junior, any comment or any observations?
Yeah, I just want to echo the first point again. I know I've harped on this a couple times, but that first piece about the hierarchy is so, so important, that humans come first, human characteristics later. So please think about that as you interact for the rest of the day, the rest of the weekend, ideally forever, but we forget things pretty quickly. Try it though, deliberately for a period of 24 hours, 48 hours, when you're at a restaurant, when you're in an Uber, when you're talking to your coworker. Look at them as humans and look at the commonality. Look at all of the ground that we share first. If we all do that, holy smokes, inclusion will increase. It's inevitable.
It's
And
inevitable.
so I really want to double click on that.
Yep.
So, Tim, anything else before we transition to a couple of the resources?
No, let's transition.
Okay. So stick around, everyone, because we're going to be talking about a few things that are very exciting. I'm going to stop Tim's share and then I'll start another one in just a second. But the first thing I want to let you know about is the giveaway. So we're going to be giving away 8 copies of the 4 stages of psychological safety to 8 of you. So what you need to do is share one takeaway from today's webinar in a LinkedIn post, tag Leader Factor and Tim, and then hashtag psychological safety. So those instructions will be posted in the chat. They will be posted in the post webinar email as well, I believe. So those are the 3 things: a takeaway on LinkedIn, tag Tim and Leader Factor, and use the hashtag psychological safety. We'll pick 8 of you to receive a copy of the book. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and share a free resource with you about psychological safety that I think you'll find very interesting. It's something that we've been working on very hard. So this is the Leader Factor website, leaderfactor.com. We just released a page called What is Psychological Safety? If you haven't looked at this, please do. What is psychological safety? An environment of rewarded vulnerability. So we created this page for everyone to be able to do a deeper dive in psychological safety and help others understand what it is and how it works. We talk a little bit about the history. We talk about rewarded and punished vulnerability, some examples. We talk about what psychological safety isn't, which is our topic for next month's webinar. So that one's going to be super cool. Please
That's really going
register
to
for
be a
that
good
one.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to do just a little bit deeper dive on the 4 stages, check out this page, leaderfactor.com/psychological-safety. You can find it by just hitting leaderfactor.com. We put together a whole bunch of videos on each of the 4 stages. And then a bunch of the resources are down here at the bottom that I want to point you to. The book, of course, and then the online course, which we're going to be talking about. We have the certification, which we just opened a new date for, keynote, team survey, and then the behavioral guide. This one is free. So if you're interested in a bunch of behaviors about psychological safety, you can come in here. Let's talk about the online course for just a moment, because this is something that we've been working on tirelessly. And many of you know about this because you were on last month's webinar when we opened up the beta. So we accepted 200 beta users to experience this product in its entirety and then provide feedback over the last 30 days as to how we can improve this product. We've done 2 development sprints since that time, and we've incorporated a tremendous amount of the feedback to get the product to where it is today. And it is available for you now to purchase through the website. So the link will be made available to you in the chat. It will also be made available to you in a post-webinar email. And you can just hit the site and find this. It's not going to be terribly difficult for you. Leaderfactor.com, you'll be able to find it. So why did we create this? This is to teach psychological safety and then put together a behavioral plan for you to go and implement over 30 days to improve psychological safety. This is for individuals in any situation, in any industry, in any position, all the way from the executive level down to the individual contributor level. If you would like to learn more about psychological safety, this is for you. The training consists of 5 different modules: an introduction, we go into the what and why of psychological safety, and then we talk about the 4 stages. So I'm looking just at inclusion safety to show you an example. So each of these has a video, along with concept review and downloadable resources. We have transcripts that are available for you that you can use to train your team if you wanted to take this offline and have a conversation with your team about inclusion. All of the videos have those transcripts in there. And after every section, you have the ability to choose a behavior that you're going to be working on over the subsequent 30 days, which is really cool. That behavioral action plan is supported by a whole bunch of email messaging and a big campaign that gets triggered once you submit your action plan. So this is an amazing resource that any of you can go and purchase and use today. For those of you who participated in the beta, one of the things that was launched just today is the certificate of completion. So if you have completed this course as part of the beta, you can go back into the platform and download your certificate of completion. So please go ahead and do that. We are anxious to see what your feedback is after we've incorporated all of the comments and all of the things that have come in over the last 30 days. So please go check it out. It's inexpensive and something that you will be able to use. If you'd like to bring it into your team or your organization, we're happy to have those conversations as well. So Tim, I think that's just about everything I have on my end. Anything from you?
Yeah, just one last thing to mention to all of you who've joined us today. You will recall last month's webinar was on the topic of the catastrophic consequences of a nice culture. I just want to let you know that in the next few days, the Harvard Business Review will be publishing our article on that topic. And it will be a little deeper dive into that topic. And I think you'll find it fascinating because it's a universal pattern that we see. The catastrophic consequences of a nice, dangerously nice, toxic nice culture. So just be on the lookout for that. I think you'll find that valuable as a resource.
Yep. Okay. Do we have any Q&A? If there are any questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. For those of you who want to hop off, that is fantastic. Thank you for being with us. Please be sure to check out the course. But if there are any questions, we've got a few minutes left, and so we're happy to take a few.
Yeah.
How can you impact change when you're not in a leadership position? Anna, that's a very interesting question. Tim, you want to tackle that one?
Sure. Let's go back to the definition of leadership. So the best synonym for the word leadership in the English language is the word influence. And so the first thing that I would do is back you up and say, you are a leader. You may not be a manager formally. You may not have title, position, and authority, but that's okay. You have the ability to influence. And that is the most important asset that you need in order to be a leader. So regardless of where you are, you've got to start. Now, the best way to influence is, first of all, to become competent. So influence is based on two things, competency and then character. So character and competence, those two. You've got to work on those to develop credibility in whatever you're doing, whatever your role is. People have to take you seriously. You have to be believable. You have to be credible. So you got to go to work on that to build your platform of credibility. And then regardless of what your position is, you'll be able to scale your influence and your impact. Even if you still are even if you're in a technical role or you're an individual contributor of one kind or another, it doesn't matter. So we work with, and I interact with incredibly powerful leaders all of the time that don't have high managerial positions, but they're taken very, very seriously in their organizations. So I would ask you to think about that. Go back to the definition of leadership. It's all about influence. And then think about how you can scale your influence and your impact. So there's something to think about. Hope that's helpful.
Definitely. Okay. Let's take just a couple more questions.
Yeah.
How do you measure inclusion? It may be just perceived inclusion, since it's easier to measure diversity and not inclusion.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting question. And it's true. Diversity is easier to see. It's easier to measure. Inclusion is not. And in order to unlock the true value of the diversity, inclusion needs to be present. So there are several things that we can do from a quantitative perspective. And that's why we have the 4 stages team survey. But it often requires getting in there and observing. There are some telltale signs and patterns of cultures where inclusion isn't present. Silence is one of them. Tim, are there any other things that you could keep an eye out for to kind of gauge how you're doing in inclusion?
Sure. So, as Junior said, silence is the first one because in our efforts to conceal, we actually reveal. We actually reveal what's going on with the team. So we can decode silence pretty quickly. If you go into a meeting, whether it's virtual or face to face or hybrid, it'll only takes you about 15 minutes to get a read on the group dynamic, because what you're looking for acts of vulnerability, and then how those acts of vulnerability are responded to by everyone else. If there's silence, that means most people are opting out. If people are really jumping in, if they're really engaging, so you can, as I say, you can really you can understand the terms of engagement and the level of inclusion pretty quickly. Another one that we've been paying attention to is self-segregation lately. The primary pattern is that people are self-segregating based on natural affinity groups. Now, that's not wrong, but if that becomes the primary and dominant pattern all the time, then it's telling you something, right? There's not boundary spanning behavior, boundary spanning norms going on in that social collective. That's telling you something. So there are some real qualitative indicators that we pay attention to. And then, as Junior said, we measure this with a psychometric scale with the 4 stages team survey. And we measure teams around the world every week, and we can measure that. We can give a team a very accurate baseline on where they are, based not just on inclusion, but all 4 of the stages of psychological safety.
So, speaking of the other stages, I'll take one last question. I'll take this one and then we'll wrap up.
Sure.
Susan, how do you deal with some people thinking that what you're saying is touchy feely? I get this question a lot. And we've centered today's conversation around inclusion. But if you recall the subtitle of the book, The Path to Inclusion and Innovation, the innovation and team performance side of the coin is something that we talk a lot about. We didn't get a chance to cover it too much today or at all today, but it has very much to do with psychological safety. If you look at team performance and the highest performing teams, you look at Project Aristotle and some of the empirical research that's been done, psychological safety is the #1 predictor of a high performing team. And the highest performing teams are the teams that innovate the fastest. And I will speak very frequently, almost every week, with operationally minded, bottom line driven business unit leaders that come to psychological safety through the channel of innovation. They're like, so what does it have to do with this, and why should I care? Well, first, we need to have inclusion. We need to pass that threshold in order to make any progress. But divergent thinking is risky. Challenging the status quo is risky. And those are the types of things that produce innovation and high-performing teams. So if you don't have a culture that's conducive to promoting that behavior, then you're not going to get that behavior. If that risk is consistently punished, people will retreat. They'll become silent and they're not going to engage in that type of behavior. And so where are you left? You're left with compliance, and that's about it. You're not going to move past that. And so you can have a very hard-hitting, performance-driven conversation that's backed by psychological safety. So that's part of why I love it so much, is it's equally applicable in both of those situations. So that is the last question that we have time for. In the last minute, what we want to say to you is thank you. Thank you for being on this journey with us. For those of you that have been attending these webinars for the last year, thank you for your continued support. our team is working tirelessly to get this content out into the world. Leader Factor's mission is to influence the world for good at scale. That is why we exist. And I want to acknowledge our team as well. That's behind the scenes. You often see
Great
just
team.
me and Tim on these webinars, but it is a whole host of team members that is making this possible in client success and graphic design, in sales and marketing, and product development and technology. We have all of these teams that are bringing these resources to you, and many of them are free. We want to get this content out. We want it to affect the world because the world desperately needs it. So from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being with us in this journey, and happy birthday to all of us for the year mark and the webinars. I think it's a significant thing, and we appreciate your participation.
Thanks, everyone. Great to be with you.
Take care. Bye-bye.